In this tutorial, we're going to create the interior of a blood vessel and some blood cells floating around it, just like the one you see in the picture. So without further ado, let's get to it. So first, let's prepare the base for the model of the blood vessel. I'm going to press A to select all of the default objects and delete them. Then I'm going to press Shift A and under Mesh select Cylinder. Then in the Add Cylinder options, I'm going to set the number of vertices to 6 and the depth to 20 meters. I will then rotate the cylinder 90 degrees on the y-axis by typing in R, Y, and 90. Now let's tab into the edit mode and press 3 for face select. Then select the front end face and delete it. Now let's repeat it for the back end of the cylinder. Next, I'm going to loop cut the cylinder by pressing Ctrl R and setting the number of cuts to 10. Then I'll tab out of the edit mode, shade the cylinder smooth, and go over to the modifiers tab. There I will select subdivision surface and set both render and viewport levels to 5. Now let's make the shape look more organic. I'm going to do it with the displace modifier. In the modifier settings, I'm going to click new to create a new texture and then head over to the texture properties tab to set it up. First, I'm going to rename my texture to vessel and set its type to clouds. And as soon as I do it, I end up with a pretty extreme looking result. Let's get back to the properties tab and give it a few adjustments. First, I'm going to set the size to 1 and give the same value to depth. This looks better, but it's still too bumpy. So let's get back to the modifiers tab and give it the final tweak. To make the displacement effect more subtle, I'm going to decrease its strength to 0.35. Now this looks way better, and I think at this point I'm done with modeling my blood vessel. One last thing I'm going to do before I proceed to modeling my blood cells is moving my model 10 meters forward on the x-axis. This is not strictly necessary, I just prefer the world origin to be my starting point. Now that we're done with the blood vessel, let's model a red blood cell. I'm going to use a cylinder as the base, so let's create one. Set the number of vertices to 16 and the depth to half a meter. Then I'm going to press numpad / to enter the isolation mode, tab into the edit mode, and press Ctrl R to make a loop cut in the middle of the cylinder. Then I'll press 3 for face select mode, select the bottom face, press delete and select vertices. Now that I only have the top half left, I'm going to go to the modifiers tab and add the mirror modifier. And after switching its axis from X to Z, I have my full cylinder again. At this point, any modifications I make to the top half will be reflected on the bottom half as well. Next, we'll select the face at the top and give it a bevel. And then add a couple of evenly sized insets to the top face. And now let's bring the innermost face down on the Z-axis to complete the basic shape of the cell. With the shape complete, let's step out of the edit mode and apply smooth shading. It's looking a bit low poly, so let's smooth it out by applying the subdivision surface modifier. We'll set both viewport and render levels to 2. Now it's looking a lot better, but it has this waviness towards the center. To fix that, we're going to need to add a little bit more geometry in that spot. So I'm going to temporarily disable the subdivision surface, tab into the edit mode, and add another inset about halfway towards the center. Now let's tab out of the edit mode and re-enable subdivision. And the waviness is gone and the overall shape is looking pretty good. The only problem with it is that it's too perfect and even to look natural. So let's give it some distortions using the same techniques we used while modeling the blood vessel. Just like before, we're going to add the displace modifier and set the strength to a very low value of 0.06. I will then create a new texture to drive the distortion and give it a name of RBC for red blood cell. Then in the texture properties, I'm going to set type to clouds. Now this is already looking much more organic. I'm just going to make the effect more subtle by setting the size to 0.5 and depth to 1. And the result is pretty close to what we're used to seeing in all sorts of medical visualizations. So I'm going to call this model done. And with both vessel and the cell ready, we can start setting up our scene. First, let's press numpad / to exit isolation mode. And it looks like I need to mesh the scale of my blood cell to the scale of my vessel. So let's press S and scale it to around 0.4 on the X and Y axis. Now let's zoom in on it and press Ctrl A to apply scale. And it immediately becomes obvious that our displace modifier settings don't work as well at this scale. So let's head back to the texture properties and set depth to 3 and size to 0.4. Yeah, I think it looks better. So I'm going to enable the move gizmo and move the blood cell into the blood vessel. Now let's set up our camera. I'm going to press Ctrl numpad 3 for left orthographic view, then Shift A and select camera. To be able to see what my camera sees, I will create a dedicated 3D viewport. I'll pull the little rounded corner at the bottom of the existing viewport, click on the icon in the top left and select 3D viewport. Then I'll bring my cursor over the new viewport and press numpad 0 for camera view. One last piece of my camera setup is located under Camera Properties inside the Viewport Display tab under Pathbar 2. Here I'm going to increase the opacity setting to 1 to prevent anything from outside of my camera viewport from distracting me. Now let's set up our camera angle. First I'll rotate it slightly to the right, then move it a bit left, and then a tiny bit down. And here we have the start of our scene composition. Next, we're going to work on lighting and materials. But before I start, I'm going to move my mouse cursor over this menu, scroll the mouse wheel down, turn on rendered shading, and disable overlays and gizmos. This way I can see the preview of my render without any distractions. Next, in the world properties, I'm going to disable the default lighting. And now that I have a blank canvas, I can start creating my own lights. I'm going to press Shift A and under Light select Point. This is clearly not strong enough, so I'm going to go to the light properties and set the power to 5000. Now I'm going to set my main viewport shading to wireframe and move my light 3 meters into the blood vessel. Then I will duplicate the light 2 times, moving each copy 3 meters further on the x-axis. This looks really overexposed, but everything will change once we add the materials. So let's select the blood vessel, go to the Materials tab, and create a new material called Vessel. I can now change my main 3D viewport to Shader Editor and start creating my shader. First I'm going to remove specular highlights and bring up roughness all the way to 1. Then I will press Shift A and under Input select Fresnel. This often mispronounced node is key to producing the look we're going for. Let's connect its output to the base color and set the index of refraction to 0.88. Something has definitely changed, but to see the real difference we need to add one more node. I'm going to press Shift A and under Color select Mix RGB. All it does is mix color 1 and color 2 based on a factor that by default is 0.5, which results in a 50-50 mix. What we're going to do is plug in the factor from the Fresnel node and then plug in the color output into the base color of the shader. Now let's set color 1 to black and color 2 to dark red. And this is exactly the result we need. Now I don't want the far end of the blood vessel to be clearly visible. I'd rather have it disappear into a sort of a dark haze. Let me show you what I mean. First I'll switch back to 3D viewport and create a cube. Then I'm going to scale the cube 7x on the x-axis. Press Ctrl A to apply the scale and align the far end of the cube with the far end of the blood vessel. With the cube selected, I'm going to create a new material and call it darkness. I will remove the surface shader from it. And under volume, select volume absorption. I'm going to set its color to black and its density to 0.8. After I do that, I can no longer see the far end of the blood vessel. Finally, let's create the blood cell material. The good news is we can reuse the blood vessel material with one minor tweak. First, let's select the blood vessel and in its material properties, click on this little down arrow and select copy material. Then we'll select the blood cell and create a new material for it. I'm going to call this material RBC for red blood cell. Now let's click on the down arrow again and this time select paste material. Now that we have a copy of the blood vessel material applied to the cell, let's go to the shader editor and set the Fresnel IOR to 1.3. Now let's get back to the 3D viewport and try to position the cell a bit better in relation to the lights so that we can see the effects of the new material. Note that when you press R twice, you enter this awesome trackball rotation mode that we'll be using quite a bit to finish our scene. Before we work on the final composition of our scene, let's go through render and camera settings. First, in my EEVEE rendering engine settings, I'm going to enable ambient occlusion and bloom. Then I'm going to scroll down to color management, and under look, select medium low contrast. Then I'm going to select my camera, and in the camera settings enable depth of field. I will then expand depth of field and set my focus distance to 3 and my f-stop to 0.8. And I'm finally ready to finish composing my scene. In the final part of this tutorial, I'm going to fill the blood vessel with copies of the cell. All I'm going to do is copy, reposition, and trackball rotate the cells so that the scene looks natural to me. Feel free to copy what I'm doing or come up with your own composition. And since it's going to take a while, I'm just going to speed it up a bit. And I think I'm finally done. If I press F12 now, I should get this render, which I'm generally happy with. So I guess it concludes this tutorial. I'll be very grateful for any feedback in the comments, and please consider liking and subscribing for more. See you all next time.